Hello and welcome to Your Broken Galaxy. I am Broken, and today I've decided to finally release What If Jar Jar Was a Sith Lord. This has been suggested by so many of you that I can't credit just one. But here we go. What if Jar Jar was a Sith Lord? He is. Okay, wait, sorry. There is an actual video. The events of The Phantom Menace have just concluded, and sitting around the funeral pyre of Qui-Gon Jinn, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine walks over to Jar Jar and says, "General Binks, I want to thank you for your role in bringing our two people together. May I have a word with you privately?" And Jar Jar says, "Okie day." So the two of them go on a little stroll about the streets of Theed, and Palpatine says, "Mr. Binks, were you aware that the Force is strong with you?" And Jar Jar says, "What's the use of saying?" And Palpatine says, "I'm surprised that the Jedi Council couldn't sense it in you. I was going to take an old man as my new apprentice, but you are far younger, and with the proper training, stronger." And Jar Jar has absolutely no idea what is going on, so he says, Misa not getting what's use is a laying down. And Palpatine says, "Jar Jar, why did you serve the Jedi?" And Jar Jar says, "Oh, he's a saving my life. When them bot boys was coming down, I was owing him a life debt." And Palpatine says, "Indeed, your life debt has come to its conclusion, has it not?" And Jar Jar says, "With Qui-Gon being gone by, Misa thinking yes." Then Palpatine says, "I understand. Would you excuse me a moment to use the restroom?" And Jar Jar says, So Palps ducks into an annoyingly elaborate public restroom and quickly calls one of his secret assassins that is on Theed. And he's like, "Hey, I need you to go and stab the Gungan next to Supreme Chancellor Palpatine on the promenade next to the river with a knife. It's gotta be a knife. Don't shoot him. Leave the Chancellor be, though." And the assassin's like, "Yes, Lord Sidious." So Palps does actually then use the restroom. I mean, a man's gotta do what he's gotta do. He's gotta relieve himself sometimes. He walks out and he says, "Jar Jar, where were we?" And Jar Jar says, "You was asking me about being free from the life in debt." "Yes, of course," Palpatine says. So he senses the assassin coming, and just as the assassin is about to jump from the shadows to stab Jar Jar, Palps turns to see him. The assassin leaps, and Palpatine takes out his lightsaber and force throws it into the assassin's chest. Jar Jar says, "Ooey, ooey, oh my. Now you see saving my life, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. Are you a Jedi?" And Palpatine says, "My name is pronounced Palpatine. 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 Palpalqueen. Palpatine. Palpatine. Good, Jar Jar. And no, I'm not a Jedi. I'm actually a Sith Lord. And since I saved your life, now you owe me a life debt." And Jar Jar says, "Oh yeah, it's demanded by the gods, it is." And Palpatine says, "I'm going to train you to be more powerful than any Jedi." And Jar Jar says, "More than any Jedi? Even the legendary Pernikar?" And Palpatine says, "How? Why would you know?" "Jar Jar, of all the Jedi you could have mentioned..." "Never mind. Yes, Jar Jar, you will be my new apprentice and more powerful than Pernikar." So the next day, Palpatine is having a little meeting regarding local politics before he heads back to Coruscant to begin his rule in earnest. And he says, "So, Boss Nass, Queen Teen, I'm going to take Jar Jar with me to serve on my staff, because he helped bring our people together and all that. You guys hold things down here for me, okay?" And they do. Jar Jar and Palps head to Coruscant and start beginning their Sith training. Palps was totally right about Jar Jar having the Force, but it manifested itself in a super odd way. Instead of Jar Jar having control of the Force, it manifests itself around almost as though it were just a mere aspect of luck, extreme and ridiculous luck, but it seems like luck to the observer. So Palpatine says, "All right, Jar Jar. So the first thing you have to do to be a Sith is learn the most basic Force technique. You need to move this rock." And Palpatine says this as he is placing a rock on a pedestal down in front of him. Without saying a word, Jar Jar reaches out with his hand, grabs the rock, picks it up, sets it 2 inches to the left of where it was, and then looks back at Palpatine and smiles like an idiot. "Jar Jar, I mean you have to use the Force. Concentrate. Use your mind," Palpatine says, pointing at his head. "Okie day," Jar Jar says. He turns back to the rock, ruffles his brow, and then leans in and pushes it with his head, and smiles at Palpatine and gives him a thumbs up. Okay, Jar Jar, you know what? Maybe I need to give you a primer on what the Force is. Isn't Force just weight times acceleration? That's not... Well, yes, actually. Okay, that's one kind of Force. Jar Jar, the Force is an underlying universal power that's just waiting to be utilized to fulfill our desires. It is in every living thing, and by mastering and controlling it, we can master and control the world around us. Palpatine reaches out with his hand, grabs the rock with the Force, and lifts it. And Jar Jar said, "Oh yeah, Misa friend Qui-Gon talking about that with little Annie." "Yes, Jar Jar, you can use the Force too." And Jar Jar says, "Oh, no, Misa isn't a Jedi." And Palpatine says, "No, you aren't a Jedi. But Jedi aren't the only ones that can use the Force." "Really?" Jar Jar asks. "Really. Anyway, I'm going to work with you to help you move this rock." So for the next few days, they focus on moving that rock, and Jar Jar finally, just barely kind of nudges it with the Force. And Palpatine is delighted. He looks at Jar Jar and says, "You've just taken your first steps into a bigger world." And Jar Jar says, "Bigger than Corvusat? I hope that the gravity is tolerable." And Palps closes his eyes in frustration, and the two sit down for a pleasant meal of gooberfish caviar. So Palpatine ends up painstakingly training Jar Jar. After weeks and weeks, the Gungan is finally able to just move the rock around freely. After several more months, Jar Jar is able to utilize the Force to jump even higher than his ridiculous standing vertical already was. Finally, after a year of absolutely agonizing and frustrating training for Palpatine, he thinks Jar Jar has gotten enough self-control to have a lightsaber. Meanwhile, the entire time, he has also been training Jar Jar in the ways of politics, government, and the aspects of dark side philosophy. So one day, after a meeting where Jar Jar serves as an aide to Palpatine, he calls him to his back room and says, "Jar Jar, you have progressed far over the last few months. Your ability to move rocks and jump really, really high have been a testament to your use of the Force. I have decided to bestow on you your first lightsaber. The crystal inside used to belong to a Jedi Master." "Oh, was it Master Ven Zallo?" "No, Jar Jar." "How in the world do you know Master Ven..." "No, Jar Jar, it doesn't matter who the Master was. I don't even know, honestly." Palpatine ignites the blade and it grows a brilliant green. "I'll teach you how to bleed this crystal and make it a proper red color," he says, and then hands it over to Jar Jar. And Jar Jar just immediately slices off his own arm. Palpatine rolls his eyes and shrugs and says, That's just great, Jar Jar," as Jar Jar is screaming in pain. "Oh, my sacrifice, my arm is so bad. Palpatine, help me, Master." "Yeah, I shouldn't be surprised," Palpatine says to himself. He calls in the medics, and after an excruciating surgery, they are able to reattach Jar Jar's arm. He recovers over the next few months and ends up getting a little better with the Force until he is given his lightsaber back. Over the next several years before the Clone Wars, Jar Jar is successful in cutting off both of his legs, one of them twice, one of his ears, and somehow the hand that he was holding his lightsaber with. But the best doctors in the galaxy always attend to his horrible injuries and heal him up again and again. After 10 years, Palpatine sees his plan coming together, and so he goes to Jar Jar and says, "Jar Jar, I have a mission for you." And Jar Jar says, "Oh, Misa is so happy. Me been waiting for muy long time for a mission. What's a Misa doing?" And Palpatine says, "Jar Jar, I need you to hire Jango Fett, our longtime friend and associate, to assassinate Padme." And Jar Jar is just absolutely horrified and says, "What's a use of saying? Me can't hurt Queenie Padme." And Palpatine, frustrated that he had overplayed the corruption that he had been slowly working into Jar Jar, ends up going with his backup plan and says, "Oh, Jar Jar, no, you misunderstand. I don't want you to take out Queen Padme. I want you to take out Senator Padme. They're different people, don't you know? They just happen to look very much alike and have the same name." And Jar Jar says, "Oh, but why is Misa doing that?" And Palps, who is just about ready to stab the Gungan himself, says, "Because she's hurting Naboo." And Jar Jar says, "Oh, Misa understand. Misa doing it right away." So Jar Jar goes and hires Jango Fett to take out Padme. The initial attack fails, so Anakin and Obi-Wan end up going to see Padme about her protection. Anakin makes an absolute fool of himself in front of Padme, looking like the most ridiculous creep you could possibly imagine, except it's absolutely and totally fine because he is hot and tall, so Padme falls for him anyway. But the assassination attempt fails, which in Palpatine's entirely ridiculous plan is actually a good thing. Because without it failing, Obi-Wan wouldn't have been able to find Kamino and then head to Geonosis in order to get the war started. Padme, however, is sent to Naboo for her own safety. Right before she leaves, Palpatine is like, "Jar Jar is from Naboo. Why don't you have him stand in for you as representative?" And Padme's like, "Yeah, whatever," because she just wants to get on her, her romantic lake vacation with the tall, hot, young Jedi that has been assigned to guard her in a platonic way. So Palps tells Jar Jar to propose granting him emergency powers. And he does. Then Jar Jar flies to Geonosis in order to court the disaffected Outer Rim political leaders into a rebellion. And it does not go well. He is not even remotely close to the statesman of Count Dooku, who, by the way, is leading Sereno through just an economic and cultural golden age since leaving the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan by this time has gotten to Geonosis himself and is spying on the gathered assorted aliens. He looks down at them from the little hole in the ceiling and he says to himself, "Jar Jar, what in the world is he doing here?" And Jar Jar makes a fool of himself and the would-be separatists leave. And so does Obi-Wan. The folks of the Separatist Council simply do not agree to join the revolution against the Republic, so Palpatine is mad as all get out at Jar Jar. He comes back to Coruscant and says, "Master Palpatine, I was doing a good job. I got them Outer Rim boys to give up attacking Yusa Republic." And Palpatine says, it's Palpatine, "Jar Jar, you were supposed to get them to join the rebellion for my plan to take over the galaxy." And Jar Jar says, "But Master, Yusa is already controlling the galaxy." And Palpatine says, "Jar Jar, for the last freaking time, I plan to become Emperor." And Jar Jar just stands there with no idea how to respond for a good 5 seconds. Then he looks down at his hand and raises it and gives Palpatine a thumbs up. So Yoda reports back to Palpatine about the army, and Palpatine is like, "Oh, where did this army come from? I've never heard of it before." And Obi-Wan says, "Well, the bounty hunter that I met said that he was recruited by the creature called Sidious, and that clones said that they were hired by a master Sifo Dyas." And Mace steps forward and says, "Yes, this is very troubling. However, because there isn't a galactic scale war, the Jedi Council isn't going to devote all of their times to fighting it. We can actually spend some time figuring out how this army came into being rather than just blindly trust them." And Palpatine, through gritted teeth, says, "A wise decision, Master Windu." Then Obi-Wan says, "By the way, I'm pretty sure it was Jar Jar that was trying to recruit people to rebel." And Palpatine says, "Master Kenobi, I know you are not a native of my home world, and the likelihood that it was Jar Jar seems preposterous. You aren't used to seeing other Gungans after all." And good old Benny Boy says, "Yes, Chancellor, I would agree, except I distinctly heard him say, 'Hiya, you Outer Rim boyos. Misa is Jar Jar Binks, and Misa thinking you should be in Separatist Friends for the Republic.'" And Palpatine, trying to control his emotions, closes his eyes and takes a deep breath and says, "I see. But I don't think that what you just said constitutes that Jar Jar was trying to form a rebellion. He is talking about Friends for the Republic." "An idiot Jar Jar Binks is," Yoda says, "put up to this by a master who has bestowed upon him too much trust he has." "Really, Master Yoda?" Palp says, a little bit perturbed and concerned his plan might be found out. "That doesn't sound likely to me." "Oh no," Obi says. "I also heard San Hill say that when Sidious contacted him, he wanted them to join a separatist alliance, to which Jar Jar responded, 'Yeah, Misa is wanting you guys to be good old friends for the Alliance of the Republic.' It was at that point that most of the freaky-looking aliens left." Rather insensitive, your remark about their appearances, Yoda said, and Mace just rolls his eyes and says, "Carry on, Master Kenobi." And he does. Meanwhile, by this point, Anakin has gone off and done his whole Tusken aside thing and is having that whole deal. Once Jar Jar gets back to Coruscant, Palpatine is just furious with him, so he does a little bit of Force lightning torture just for fun. Once he's had his fill, he says, "Jar Jar, I think it's time I got a new apprentice." And Jar Jar says, "Oh, that's a good news. I was thinking of having a career change." And Palpatine says, "No, Jar Jar." Starting to explain, but then realizes it's completely useless to explain and just zaps him again for a little bit. Jar Jar, in his incredible and ridiculous pain, screams with all of his might and actually force pushes Palpatine back. And as Palpatine falls back, he slips on a banana peel that he hadn't seen Jar Jar eating a little bit earlier. Jar Jar looks at his shackles and says, "Come on, shackly boys, please be letting Misa go." And it actually works. He falls from the wall he was shackled to and goes running down a hallway, waving his hands in the air like an idiot as Palpatine deals with his sprained ankle. Sidious, over the course of the next 4 years, uses his back channels to reestablish the Separatist cause and get the war started. By this time, though, Anakin has been expelled by the Jedi Order for his illicit marriage with Palpatine after she had her babies, and they end up just flying to Naboo. Padme has also been replaced as senator, so they basically just sit out the war and occasionally engage in protests and stuff. Sidious, meanwhile, was able to sense the darkness in Pong Krell and made him his apprentice. So Grievous is still the primary general of the army, and Pong Krell is mostly doing stuff behind the scenes. One night, just after dark, Padme and Anakin are sitting on their balcony under the lights and with a lovely fire, having champagne that costs as much as a normal person makes in a month. Anakin gets a sense of imminent danger and stands raising his lightsaber as Jar Jar jumps from the shadows, accidentally landing with his foot on the fire that was sitting in front of Padme and kicking burning coals onto a $10,000 outdoor chair sitting next to them. "Jar Jar," Padme says in surprise, "do you need me to go get some ice for your foot?" "Oh, hi, Queenie. Misa thinking that's a good idea. But how's the Yusa doing?" Jar Jar responds. Anakin, extinguishing his lightsaber, says, "Jar Jar, dude, it's been 15 years? He walks over to the Gungan and the two engage in a secret handshake, followed by a bro hug. And Jar Jar says, "Oh, Annie, Misa missing you. But Misa is here because Wisa is being in big poodoo. Chancellor Palpatine is going to take over the galaxy." And Padme says, "That sounds unlikely," handing him an ice pack. And then Anakin stops for a second and says, "Padme, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think that Jar Jar is right. If Palpatine is a Sith Lord, then every single piece of the puzzle falls into place. He's probably got some plan cooked up to assassinate the Jedi using the clones after gaining their trust and then turning the entire Republic into an empire or something. We're just lucky he wasn't able to recruit me through some horribly convoluted plan after I went through all that stuff on Tatooine. I'm very glad you pushed me to get therapy for that, by the way." And Jar Jar, unaware of precisely what Anakin is talking about, just gives him a thumbs up and smiles like an idiot. "Jar Jar, my children are strong in the Force, but they are still merely children. But I've known you since I've met you, that you were strong in the Force. I must train you as a Jedi over the course of about a 3-week period before we go and take on Chancellor Palpatine." And Jar Jar says, "No, Misa is a sorry, Annie, but Misa is no Jedi. Misa is a Sith, and must be training you in them Sithly ways to stopping the Sithly master." And Anakin and Padme, dumbfounded by the revelation, stand there in silence for a moment until Anakin says, "I'm sorry, what? You're a Sith Lord?" And Jar Jar says, "Yeah, after Wisa was saving Naboo from all them robo-boys, Chancellor Palpatine was recruiting me and training me to using them Force." At which point, he shoots a bolt of Force lightning into the air to prove himself. And Anakin says, "Well, all right, Jar Jar, you train me in the ways of the Sith, and I'll train you in the ways of the Jedi, and together we'll take down Palpatine." So for the next 3 weeks, Anakin trains Jar Jar, Luke, and Leia in the Force every morning, and every afternoon Jar Jar teaches Anakin in the ways of the Sith. After 3 weeks, Padme brings them both into a room, dims the lights, and plays a training montage that she had been spending half an hour editing every night, showing their incredible progress. And it is freaking epic. She even went to a trans-dimensional black market broker to go forward in time to the Earth in 1980s to grab just the sickest soundtrack that you can imagine for this thing. Once they finish watching it, they stand up and Anakin tells Jar Jar he is a Jedi Knight, thereby making himself a Jedi Master, and Jar Jar says, "Little Annie, you have been my muy good apprentice, and now you is a Sith Lord." And Anakin says, "That's great, Jar Jar. Let's go." So the two ready their ship to fly to Coruscant. They land, and Anakin, disgraced former Jedi that he is, runs up to Mace, who says, "Skywalker, you dolt! I thought I told you that if you were ever to show your face around here again, that I'd beat the crap out of you." "Master Windu, I'm afraid I've learned a terrible truth. Chancellor Palpatine is a Sith Lord." And Mace just backhands him as hard as he possibly can, right in the face. All of his knuckles even crack. "A Sith Lord?" Mace asks. "Ow, frick, man, that really hurt," Anakin says. "Master Windu, Annie's just trying to say that Palpatine is a Sith Lord." "What the frick is this thing?" Mace says, looking at Jar Jar. "I'm a Jar Jar Binks. I'm a Sith Jar Jar," Anakin yells, cutting him off. "Oh, he's a Gungan, you know, from my wife's homeworld." "From your what's world?" Mace asks, looking at Anakin indignantly. And Anakin, just brimming with shame, looks down at the ground and says, "My wife?" And Mace says, "I freaking hate you, Skywalker." And Anakin says, "Okay, yeah, that's fine, but I'm serious about the Chancellor being a Sith Lord. You should go deal with that." And Mace slaps him again and then steps onto a lat, which just happens to be carrying Kit Fisto, Agen Kolar, and Saesee Tiin. They fly over to Palpatine's, and Anakin looks at Jar Jar and says, "Well, our work here is done. I'm gonna go have more kids with my wife now." And Jar Jar says, "Annie, do you really thinking that them Jedi boyos is able to defeat Darth Palpatine?" And Anakin says, "Yeah, they're pretty freaking powerful." Meanwhile, the Jedi Masters arrive and Palps just slaughters the three useless ones. After Mace beats him back, he is just about to take him down, but out of nowhere, Pong Krell comes rushing at Mace and cuts off his hand. Palpatine zaps him and sends him flying out the window. About 8 seconds later, Anakin comes walking in, dragging his feet, and yells out, "Master Windu, Jar Jar said we should..." "Oh, crap!" he says as he sees the bodies of the Jedi Masters. "Jar Jar," Palpatine says with seething hatred. "Darth Krell, kill that Gungan." And Pong Krell looks over at him and says, "You know, I have a pretty cool name and all, but can't you give me a more proper Darth title?" And Sidious says, "You'll get it once you earn it." So Pong Krell goes running forward, and Anakin just slices him half, and not like just an easy slice in half, like between left and right or top to bottom. No, Anakin force jumps next to him and slices him in half front to back. Jar Jar promptly throws up in revulsion at the state of what has happened to Pong Krell, and Anakin begins to walk towards Palpatine. "Join me, Skywalker, and you and I can rule the galaxy," Palp says, and Anakin says, "Actually, after leaving the Jedi Order, I spent the last several years extensively discussing political systems with my wife, who has served in several political roles, and now even teaches political theory at Theed University. I've come to believe that the kind of authoritarian rule that you seem to be espousing would be a net negative for freedom, prosperity, and overall quality of life for the denizens of the galaxy. So while I am grateful for the offer, I must humbly decline." And Jar Jar says, "Annie, wait!" And Anakin looks back at Jar Jar in confusion, and the Gungan says, "A proud Sithin tradition. The Apple Tents challenge the Master. If he's a winning, then he's a taking over them Sith boys. This is mine responsibility." And Anakin says, "Apple Tents?" "He means apprentice," Palpatine says. "Jar Jar, you can't be serious. This guy has just totally ended all these Jedi Masters. He's obviously incredibly powerful," Anakin says. And Jar Jar says, "A Gungan must be a-doing what he's a-gotta be a-doing." And Anakin looks down at his lightsaber, then back at Jar Jar, then down at his lightsaber and extinguishes it. All right, he says. Go get him, Darth Jar Jar. And Jar Jar smiles at Anakin and looks at Sidious sternly and says, Your time is up, Palpatine. At which point, Palpatine force throws his saber into Jar Jar's heart, then force pulls both Jar Jar and the saber back into his hand, and grabs Jar Jar by the neck and starts punching him in the face, screaming, My name is Palpatine! Anakin, kind of wincing at the beatdown his friend is getting, thinks maybe he should jump in, but he knows that Jar Jar has to do this alone. After 30 seconds of beating, Palpatine grabs the hilt of his saber, still embedded in Jar Jar's chest, thrust kicks him in the stomach, knocking him back, blasts him with Force Lightning while throwing him into the wall, then force pulls him back to himself, decapitating him, and force pushing his broken remains out the window. Anakin screams, You monster! That was my best friend! And Palpatine says, I'm sorry, what? And Anakin says, He is my oldest friend. I loved him like a brother. And Palpatine says, What about Obi-Wan? And Anakin says, What about Obi-Wan? That freaking jerk tried to keep me from having my amazing wife. That guy's a jerk. But Jar Jar was always there for me. So Anakin run forwards. They have an absolutely epic 15-minute lightsaber duel with lightning and force throws, explosions, fireworks, and Anakin ends up cutting off both Palp's arms and legs. He is not reinstated to the Jedi Order, but instead is arrested for treason for attacking the Chancellor, though after a 3-year court case he is released when they are ultimately able to prove that Palpatine was really behind the entire war. Jar Jar is remembered forever as a martyr and hero of the Republic, and the galaxy lives happily ever after. At least until the Yuzong Vong came in 35 years and just kill everybody. Absolute slaughter. Nothing left but ashes and bloodstains. Well, that is my video for today, and I do hope that you liked it. You may have noticed that I've not been doing much in the way of videos lately. Different things are happening in my real life outside of the internet that are very good but do keep me somewhat busy. I'll probably make more videos in the future. I do still absolutely plan to have a 150 clone orders live stream at some point, hopefully in the next couple weeks. Keep recommending video ideas if you want to, but unless I have a massive upsurge in viewership, I don't think I'm going to be making videos even close to as normally as I have been up until this point. Basically, it has been a ton of fun, but it just takes too much time away from my other stuff, and I pretty much have to treat it like a part-time job or just a very occasional hobby. And as a part-time job, I'd have to actually make, at least minimum wage doing it, which is quite a bit. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and all that garbage.